There is a stone in the quarry at Baalbek, Lebanon, that has been lying in the ground for 2,000 years. It weighs an estimated 1,650 tons. That is heavier than 3 fully loaded Boeing 747s. It was shaped, prepared, and left. Not abandoned, prepared. Someone cut it from the bedrock with the clear intention of moving it. And then it just stayed there. 2,000 years later, we cannot move it. The largest crane currently operating in the Middle East has a maximum lift capacity of around 1,200 tons. The stone at Baalbek is not a relic of a civilization that tried and failed. It is a relic of a civilization that moved stones this size routinely. That placed 3 of them, each weighing 750 to 800 tons, into the foundation of a temple, 6 meters above ground, with a precision that modern engineers describe as nearly impossible to replicate. There are 7 other places on Earth where ancient builders did something physically impossible and left the evidence sitting in plain sight. This is the story of all 8 of them. Cusco, Peru. The city sits at 3,400 meters above sea level, in the thin, cold air of the Andes. And above it, on a ridge line that overlooks everything, stands a wall that has been there for so long that the Inca who arrived centuries after it was built believed it was constructed by giants. The wall is built from interlocking polygonal blocks of limestone and diorite and andesite, each block a different shape from every other, fitted together without a single gram of mortar and without a right angle anywhere in the structure. The largest stones at Sacsayhuamán weigh over 200 tons. That is the equivalent of 33 adult African elephants stacked on a single block. The blocks were quarried from a site approximately 35 kilometers away, which means they were transported across rivers, ravines, and a mountain pass, and then lifted into position with a precision that a razor blade cannot penetrate. There is no gap between any 2 fitted stones wide enough to insert a blade. In 1983, aerospace engineer Christopher Dunn, who had spent 49 years working with high-tolerance machining, examined the joints at Sacsayhuamán and wrote that the polygonal fitting he observed could not be replicated by modern CNC machinery without a pre-planned design laid out before a single stone was cut. The shapes interlock in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Every stone is a custom solution to the stones already in place around it. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de León visited in 1553 and asked the Inca directly, "Who built this?" Their answer, recorded in his published account: "These walls existed before the Inca came. They did not build Sacsayhuamán. They found it. The structure is now called an Inca fortress because it sits above the Inca capital. But the Inca themselves left a written record saying they had nothing to do with its construction, and no one since has successfully identified the culture that did." There is a stone near the complex called Piedra Cansada, the tired stone. It is a massive block that was abandoned mid-transport, lying where it stopped, still partially shaped for the wall it was apparently intended for. The accepted archaeological estimate for building Sacsayhuamán is 20,000 workers over 80 years. That estimate does not explain how the joints were fitted, how the stones were transported over a mountain pass, or why a culture with that level of organization left no documented method anywhere. At Sacsayhuamán, every block is irregular, no 2 are the same shape, and yet they all fit together with machine precision. The next site we are going to look at is the precise opposite problem. The blocks there are identical, perfectly modular components of a system that appears to have been designed to be assembled like an industrial product, then scattered across a high plateau by something that brought the whole structure down in a single event. Puma Punku sits at 12,800 feet above sea level on the Bolivian Altiplano, 2 kilometers from the ancient city of Tiwanaku, in the kind of thin, cold air that makes any sustained physical work feel like punishment. The ground around it is littered with enormous stone blocks that appear to have been thrown. Not placed, not arranged, thrown. The current leading explanation among geologists is that whatever was originally built here was destroyed by a catastrophic flood, which scattered the components of a complete structure across several hundred meters of open ground. The blocks at Puma Punku are made of andesite, a volcanic stone that sits at 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Harder than steel, harder than any tool the people of Tiwanaku are documented to have possessed. And yet, the surfaces of these blocks are perfectly flat, when the edges are perfectly square, and the drill holes that run through them, 6 millimeters in diameter, consistent in width from entry to exit, are evenly spaced to within fractions of a millimeter. The largest block weighs approximately 131 tons. The nearest andesite quarry is on the Copacabana Peninsula, 90 kilometers away across Lake Titicaca. The Tiwanaku culture had no wheel, no iron tools, and no written language. And there are no practice blocks anywhere at the site, no evidence of trial and error, no broken attempts. The precision begins with the first stone and does not vary. The Inca, who arrived at Tiwanaku centuries after it was abandoned, had a story about Puma Punku. According to their oral tradition, recorded by Spanish chroniclers after the conquest, this place was not built by men. It was built by the gods, like in a single night, before the sun existed. When the sun rose for the first time, the gods were turned to stone, and the ruins are what remains. That is not presented here as an explanation. It is presented as a data point. The people who lived closest to this site and knew it best did not believe human beings built it. There are H-shaped blocks at Puma Punku that have been studied extensively by engineers. Each H-block has 80 separate geometric faces. All of them are cut to the same tolerances. The blocks appear designed to interlock into a larger structure through a system of channels and protrusions. The structure they would have formed has never been reconstructed, because the pieces were scattered by whatever destroyed the site. We do not know what it looked like when it was standing. The Puma Punku raises a question of technology, of how any civilization achieved this level of precision with the materials they had available. The next site strips that question down to something even more fundamental. It does not ask how a civilization built something. It asks how a civilization existed at all. Because the people who built the next site should not, according to everything we understood about human development, have been capable of organizing a construction project of any kind. Southeastern Turkey, October 1994. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt is walking a hilltop that local farmers have been plowing for decades, moving rocks from their fields for generations, assuming they are ordinary boulders. He notices the shape of one exposed limestone slab and stops. It is not a boulder. It is the top of a carved T-shaped pillar. He begins to excavate, and within days, he understands he is not looking at a village or a burial site. He is standing on the oldest temple ever found. Göbekli Tepe dates to at least 9,600 BCE, 12,000 years ago. Stonehenge was built around 3,000 BCE, making Göbekli Tepe 6,000 years older. The Great Pyramid began around 2,500 BCE, meaning this site predates it by more than 7,000 years. The T-shaped limestone pillars range up to 5.5 meters tall and weigh up to 20 tons each. Underground penetrating radar has mapped at least 20 circular enclosures across the hilltop, and only about 10% of the site has been excavated. The pillars carry animal carvings, foxes, lions, vultures, scorpions, in a figurative style that presupposes generations of accumulated artistic tradition. The people who built this had no agriculture, no permanent settlements, no metal tools, no pottery. They were hunter-gatherers who, by everything previously understood about human development, should not have been capable of organized monumental construction at this scale. Schmidt directed excavations here for 20 years before his death in 2014. His conclusion came in one sentence that archaeology has since broadly accepted. First came the temple, then the city. The old model held that agriculture produced food surplus. The surplus allowed permanent settlements, and settlements eventually generated religion and monumental building. Göbekli Tepe inverts this. The compulsion to build a sacred gathering place may have come first, and the need to feed a workforce there may have been what pushed hunter-gatherers to begin cultivating grain. The site was buried systematically, filled with rubble and sediment until every pillar was hidden underground. Whether this was deliberate or managed collapse, whoever used Göbekli Tepe sealed it and walked away. It remained invisible for 10,000 years. We still do not know what tradition built it, what language its builders spoke, or why it was covered over, because nothing closely resembling it has been found anywhere else on Earth. The mystery at Göbekli Tepe is a mystery of human organization, what a mind can design before civilization exists. The next mystery strips that dimension away entirely. It is purely physical. There is no question of ideology or belief. There is only one question. How did anyone move that much stone to that specific location? And why did they choose a place that makes the answer nearly impossible to find? The island of Pohnpei sits in the western Pacific Ocean, roughly 2,500 miles northeast of Australia. Off its southeastern coast, rising directly from a coral reef, are the walls of Nan Madol, 92 artificial islands built from stacked basalt logs connected by tidal canals covering roughly 200 acres. There is no fresh water anywhere in the complex, no soil for growing food, and no logical reason to build a city on a coral reef rather than on dry land a few hundred meters away. The Saudalur rulers of Pohnpei moved an estimated 750,000 metric tons of basalt to construct Nan Madol, an average of 1,850 tons per year over 4 centuries. The basalt logs are naturally formed hexagonal columns, up to 6 meters long and weighing up to 50 tons each. The walls of the central mortuary rise 7.5 meters. The closest confirmed quarry is on the opposite side of Pohnpei, requiring every stone to cross open ocean. The Saudalur had no wheeled vehicles, no draft animals, and no metal tools. Archaeologists once tried loading a single basalt column onto a bamboo raft. It sank immediately. Archaeologist Mark McCoy, who has studied the site for decades, stated that the blocks were moved from 20 to 50 miles away without pulleys, wheels, or animals, and the labor must have been tremendous. He offered no mechanism for how it was done. Rufino Mauricio is Pohnpei's only resident archaeologist and has dedicated his professional life to this site. He told Smithsonian Magazine directly, "We don't know how they brought the columns here, and we don't know how they lifted them up to build the walls. Most Pohnpeians are content to believe they used magic to fly them." That is not a fringe position. It is the conclusion of the person most qualified to answer, offered after years of first-hand work. The oral tradition holds that twin sorcerers named Olasipa and Olasopa arrived from a sinking land, levitated the basalt logs through the air, and built Nan Madol to worship an agricultural deity. That story has remained consistent across every recorded version. When scientists conducted a LiDAR survey in 2019, they found an irrigation system inside the complex, something the oral history had never mentioned. The discovery raised one question. What else does the oral record remember that archaeology has not yet confirmed? At Nan Madol, the impossibility is transportation, moving objects of enormous weight across open ocean with no documented equipment. At the next site, the problem is identical, but at a scale so extreme it stops feeling like a construction mystery and starts feeling like a statement. Someone at Baalbek was not simply building. Someone was moving stones that no civilization before or since has ever successfully lifted. In Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, about 900 meters from the Temple of Jupiter, a stone still lies in the ground where it was quarried. It has been there for at least 2,000 years, shaped, sized, and fully prepared for transport, and then simply left. Not because the builders ran out of time. At least 3 other stones of comparable weight were successfully moved to the temple and placed in position. This one never made the journey, and no record anywhere explains why. The stone, known as the Forgotten Stone, found in 2014 by the German Archaeological Institute, is estimated to weigh approximately 1,650 tons, making it the heaviest quarried block ever documented on Earth. The heaviest stones in the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh around 80 tons. The Trilithon, 3 stones already positioned at the base of the Temple of Jupiter, each weigh between 750 and 800 tons and sit roughly 6 meters above ground. The quarry sits 900 meters from the temple and is slightly higher than the building site, meaning the stones traveled downhill. That accounts for the direction, but nothing about the mechanism. The maximum lifting capacity of the largest Roman crane was approximately 50 to 60 tons. Modern heavy lift cranes capable of handling 800-ton loads require months of site preparation and teams of specialized engineers to operate. In 27 BCE, none of that existed. A structural engineering study published in Academia in 2024 analyzed 4 proposed mechanical methods for lifting and transporting the Trilithon, and found that every mechanism either requires equipment demonstrably absent from antiquity or demands a quantity of ropes and pulleys too large to physically fit in the space surrounding the stones. The study proposed 4 new theoretical approaches. None have been tested at scale. None account for how the stones were seated against each other with the millimeter precision visible in the completed structure. The Romans documented nearly everything they built. Architectural drawings, administrative records, and celebratory inscriptions survive from construction projects across the entire empire. There is not a single Roman document that mentions the Baalbek foundation stones, because the Romans built on top of a foundation already in place when they arrived. The pre-Roman origin of the Trilithon has no documented author, no culture that claimed it, and no tool marks consistent with any known ancient stoneworking tradition. At Baalbek, the weight of the stones is the problem with no solution. At the next site in the Andes, the same problem exists, but layered with something more: altitude. Building anything at 13,000 feet is physiologically brutal even with modern equipment. Building a precision stone city there from blocks sourced 60 miles away is something that modern engineering has never attempted, let alone successfully replicated. The Bolivian Altiplano sits at roughly 3,825 meters above sea level, a broad, treeless plateau of cold wind and thin air, where the temperature drops well below freezing most nights, and where the oxygen content means sustained heavy physical labor without adequate rest becomes dangerous within minutes. In the middle of this plateau, the city of Tiwanaku rises from cut andesite stone, its temples, pyramids, and gateway aligned with mathematical precision across a complex covering 4 square kilometers. The blue-gray andesite used in Tiwanaku's most precise structures was quarried at the Cerro Capia volcano on the Copacabana Peninsula, approximately 90 kilometers away, and across Lake Titicaca. The red sandstone came from a quarry roughly 10 kilometers distant, on transporting andesite across a high-altitude lake on reed boats, without metal clamps, without sinking the boats, and without any recorded port infrastructure, has never been successfully replicated in a controlled experiment. At this altitude, a worker engaged in heavy labor requires roughly 40% more calories and significantly more rest than at sea level. The Gate of the Sun, carved from a single block of andesite, 3 meters tall and 4 meters wide, weighs approximately 10 tons and carries 48 subsidiary figures across its face, each executed with a precision that modern stone carvers describe as beyond what sustained manual work would produce. E. George Squire visited Tiwanaku in the 1860s and published his account in 1877. He documented the quality of stone cutting throughout the complex and observed that many surfaces were finished to a standard that had nothing to do with function. The same precision applied to block faces that would be completely hidden once construction was complete. His conclusion was that whoever built Tiwanaku operated according to a standard of craftsmanship that had nothing to do with what could be seen and everything to do with a requirement for internal perfection. Tiwanaku collapsed around 1000 CE after roughly 500 years at its peak. Radiocarbon dating of the final occupation layers suggests the abandonment was rapid, not a gradual withdrawal, but a near-complete disappearance within a generation. Modern research points to prolonged regional drought as the most likely cause. The stones remained perfectly fitted, and no successor culture ever came close to matching the precision of the construction. The Inca, who arrived centuries later, incorporated Tiwanaku into their mythology as the place where Viracocha created the first humans. Tiwanaku's precision is consistent enough across the entire site to read like a single architectural intelligence at work. What makes the next site so unsettling is that the same quality of stonework appears 4,000 kilometers away across open ocean, on a remote volcanic island with no documented connection to South America, built by people who reached it by canoe. Easter Island is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth, roughly 3,700 kilometers from the coast of South America and nearly 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited island. The Rapa Nui people who settled there arrived around 1250 CE, and within a few generations, constructed over 300 stone platforms called ahu along the coastline. The moai statues get most of the attention. The platforms themselves, which are in many ways the greater engineering problem, are almost always overlooked. The ahu are built without mortar. Individual stones weigh between 1 and 5 tons, and the Tahai ceremonial complex alone required an estimated 23,000 cubic meters of rock and earth fill, approaching 2,000 tons. The ahu at Vinapu presents the most specific problem. Its seaward wall is constructed from massive polygonal blocks of basalt, redressed and fitted with interlocking irregular faces in exactly the same manner as the walls of Sacsayhuamán in Peru, a site 4,000 kilometers away on a different continent. Built by a culture with no documented contact with Rapa Nui. The connection was identified by archaeologist William Malloy in 1958 and has never been explained. Researchers have estimated that carving a single stone at Ahu Vinapu without metal tools, working against basalt, which exceeds granite in hardness, would require years of work from a skilled mason. The Rapa Nui people carved hundreds across an island whose total population never exceeded 30,000. Dutch explorers encountered Easter Island in 1722 and documented the moai and the ahu platforms, immediately noting the resemblance of the stonework to structures they had read about in Peru. That observation was dismissed for 2 centuries as coincidence. In September 2024, a genetic study published in Nature confirmed that Rapa Nui individuals predating European contact carried Native American ancestry, evidence of trans-Pacific contact before 1722. The possibility that construction knowledge traveled the same route as those genetic markers has not been systematically investigated. Every moai on Easter Island was toppled during intertribal warfare across the 17th and 18th centuries. The ahu platforms survived because demolishing one meant dismantling thousands of tons of dry stacked stone with no equipment, and that effort was not worth a symbolic victory. The platforms outlasted the civilization that built them, the conflicts that destroyed the statues, and every explanatory theory proposed since, and they remain standing on an unstable volcanic coastline in saltwater air, without a gram of mortar. Every site we have covered was built by a civilization, people organized around shared belief and shared labor. The final entry on this list was built by one man, alone in the dark, in 20th century Florida. using methods that a 5-foot Latvian immigrant with a 4th-grade education and a broken heart refused to explain to anyone. Florida City, Florida, 1923. Neighbors notice a small man working at night on a piece of land he purchased for $12. He works alone, and he works mostly after dark, and nobody ever sees him actually move a stone. In the morning, stones that were not there the day before are now in place. He is 5 feet tall, weighs approximately 100 pounds, has tuberculosis, a 4th-grade education, and 1 broken heart. His name is Edward Leeds-Kalnin. Over the next 28 years, working alone and largely at night, Leeds-Kalnin quarried, shaped, transported, and placed more than 1,100 tons of oolite limestone. Individual blocks weigh up to 23 tons. His most famous creation is a 9-ton gate. A single slab of limestone balanced so precisely on its axis that a child could swing it open with the push of 1 finger, fitting within a 1/4 inch of the surrounding walls on both sides. In 1936, when the land around his original site was scheduled for development, Leeds-Kalnin hired a single truck with a driver and moved the entire structure, every stone, every carving, every placement, 10 miles to a new location. He loaded the truck himself, at night, alone. The truck driver arrived each morning to find everything already loaded on the truck. The driver never saw how a single stone was moved. When visitors asked Leeds-Kalnin how he moved the stones, his answer never changed. "I understand the laws of weight and leverage, and I know the secrets of the people who built the pyramids." He published 4 pamphlets on magnetism and electric current. He filled with diagrams and theories that mainstream physicists described as eccentric, but not entirely without insight. He died in 1951 of kidney failure, having never given a complete explanation of any kind. His tool shed contained pulleys, chain hoists, and salvaged automobile parts. No one has replicated his work. When the 9-ton gate stopped working in 1986, engineers discovered what Leeds-Kalnin had done. He had drilled a hole from top to bottom through the entire 8-foot slab without electric tools and inserted a metal shaft resting on a single truck bearing. The bearing had rusted after decades, which was the only reason the gate had stopped. To remove it for repair, 6 men and a 50-ton crane were required. When reinstalled with new components, the gate was declared functional, and it has never moved with the same effortless ease it had for 6 decades under Leeds-Kalnin's original setup. The engineering principle was simple. The precision required to drill a perfectly centered 8-foot vertical shaft through solid limestone, alone, at night, with salvaged tools, and balance 9 tons on a truck bearing has never been explained and never been replicated. 8 sites, 4 continents, 12,000 years of history. Every single one of them involves the movement or placement of stone at a scale or precision that the civilization responsible had no documented ability to achieve. Not some of them, all of them. The honest answer is not aliens. It is not that ancient humans were smarter than we think. The honest answer is this: we are missing a chapter. Something happened in human history that left physical evidence across the planet and no written record anywhere. Not a rumor, not a legend. Physical evidence, still standing, still fitted, still impossible to fully explain. These buildings are not mysteries. They are the fingerprints of something we have not yet named. If this stays with you, subscribe. This channel exists for exactly this kind of question. Leave a comment below. Which of these 8 sites do you find hardest to explain? We read everyone. The next video covers the one thing all 8 of these sites have in common that nobody talks about. And it is not the stones.